since day one of college, freshman year, I took every psychology course. I fell in love with it. Of course, I meandered like most during college at times, but I
Mhm.
really felt a strong conviction that there is beauty in taking the pain and the tragedy and trauma, and number one, knowing it's gonna be a process, and number two, part of that process could, what a gift, be a way to help others. Now there's lots of tricky dynamics because you have to be very thoughtful about why one becomes a therapist.
Welcome to the Do You Feel Heard podcast, a production of Helping the Herd. Helping the Herd is committed to empowering individuals to liberate themselves from the patterns that keep them from creating their ideal life. If you like this podcast, visit helpingtheherd.com to find resources and personalized coaching to empower you to be your best self.
Good morning. Damon Krohn, friend of the show. So good to see you. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. Good morning, and oh, what a pleasure. Thanks for setting this up, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, one of my favorite people. I've been really excited for this. So, yeah, no, thanks for your time this fine morning. I'm on a fine Pittsburgh morning, and winter finally ended. June 3rd, as of recording, winter finally ended, it seems, after a month of just no sun, rain every day. The sun has come out, the birds are chirping, the cats are chasing the birds. It's a good time to be alive. How are things in wherever you are? Tell the listeners where you're tuning in from.
Yes, no, it's gonna be about 85 today. My wife and I and two boys, we're in the western suburbs of Chicago. So, we had snow and hail this morning, and it'll be 85 later today. No, it's been
Uh,
it's been really nice recently. We're at that kind of transition period where the kids just got out of school, so they're into summer vibes, and parents are into how do we corral these these youngsters for the time off. So, but it's been nice. It's
um,
been nice, and even better to see your face. Always a bright spot.
thank you. It's good to hear. Forget about that with kids with summer. It's just a whole nother world that you're entering into as a parent. Uh, Yeah, it really is. And yeah, no, thanks for the location setting. I really like that. The classic old fogey question, how's the weather over there? I've had more talks with my family about the weather than any other topic ever. It's just they watch Weather Channel for states that they don't even live in, that they don't know anyone in. I don't get it. But there is something universal and equalizing about it, you know?
It's certain,
Uh,
certainly. It's we have an infamous meteorologist here, Tom Skilling, who retired, and he
okay.
is he is salient and imperative in one's household in terms of a guide. So I can appreciate that. It is a universal question, and if you're a dad and start getting into
Mhm.
dad jokes, it falls right in. So.
I love that. I'm definitely seeing the future of American spirituality being centered around the wizards who predict the weather, and that being the spiritual guidance that we seek.
Gotta get in
It makes
early.
sense, actually.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Well, let's start with just how we know each other. Damon, I met you forever and ever ago when I was in PA school in Chicago, Midwestern University. And man, what year would that have been? Around 2017 or 2018.
I,
It was early on in my tenure.
that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So forever and ever ago, different world. And I was lucky enough when I finally, for the first time in, wow, yeah, I think the first time in my life, wandered into a counseling center that you were thankfully providing incredible therapy at the university to all the healthcare professionals from these different programs, MD or sorry, DO, nursing, physical therapy, PA, a PsyD. You were there manning the fort with three other therapists, I believe, and trying to control the mental health of an entire campus, or help the mental health of the entire campus of type A neurotic health professionals. And I finally wandered in for the first time I think ever, and I was lucky enough that I got you out of all four wonderful therapists. I'm sure it would have been great no matter what, but very lucky you were there when I just walked in and was like, hey, and it hit it off from there. You provided excellent therapy for me for many years, and that was at the start. I wanted to say where I was hiding it from people. I remember trying to sneak out after like a lecture and be like, "Gotta go to the place," and run away. So funny to be at this point now where we're talking about it on a podcast, and where it hit me this morning, remembering that stigma around mental health and therapy was so deep that my best friends there, I was like not wanting to let them know that I was seeing a therapist. And obviously don't believe that's a way to be now, but we've come a long way. So yeah, that's what I remember about our meeting.
Certainly. No, I remember it was refreshing because I think you were the only person I had on an intake session pontificate about existential issues, um, study for clin med, pathology, gross anatomy, ask about consciousness and my thoughts about what constitutes happiness and meaning in life. So it was impressive and certainly refreshing. I mean, to your point about the stigma, you're right, especially in medical professions. It was interesting to sit back and observe how many people had to go into ninja skills and try to find a way to get in and get out without being observed by a classmate or a peer. And while that stigma is still there, it was neat to see folks more and more amenable to coming in and advocating for themselves. And I remember a few situations where leaders in the DO program spoke in front of the entire class and talked about how it's empowering to admit our weaknesses and to recognize when we need help. God knows, and in a medical training context where there's incessant demands, the toll that takes. So while there's still issues with stigma, I think more and more folks are amenable to reaching out for counseling and receiving help. And of course, we have to be in a space where we can receive it, even if we're in counseling. But the number of folks who are open to it now and not having to parachute in to avoid being seen has been really neat.
That's absolutely right. I've definitely seen that. It was interesting to be part of that change, realizing like I have a part in this wave of, how this goes with stigma and with mental health and medicine by my sharing and how I share and who I share with. And, eventually went to this side of being just a very big open advocate for it because it's been so helpful for me, especially because I had such a great therapist who was so helpful at such a formative time. I'm a lucky guy. But yeah, I do think I've seen the same, very, wide scale acceptance, even if everyone still has their own maybe different hang-ups around different things. And the society and how we talk is definitely so open now compared to, I think, whenever I started.
And you did certainly help because what was impressive is that you've always been sort of precociously driven by values, and of course you're too humble to admit that. But it often, especially in a medical context where there is a pecking order, often the folks who can ace tests, especially in didactic years, the folks who get the best residencies are sort of idealized or admired or seen as sort of pain free, as much as an illusion that is. So I think it was super helpful to see, at least in your program, someone like yourself who did well academically say, hey, it's okay to not feel like you're invulnerable, and to actually admit when folks need change, and I can be the person to really start to disseminate that message. So it's in your bones to be collaborative and to help folks who are equivocating, because most people are conflicted for good reason about entering psychotherapy or counseling.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I'm glad that less and less people have to, crawl underneath the chairs in the waiting room and, roll out of the door, somersault into the next closet and to get out of there. So I'm glad we're probably preventing a lot of injuries the more we accept this wonderful treatment. And so it's a great way to start. Tell me about your journey as a therapist, how and why you first got into this. And now, at this point in your career, looking back, what was that journey? Who and what did you work with, and how did you find yourself sitting across from me today?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's, every aspect of life is certainly a journey. It's hard for me to articulate my sort of growth and development without talking a little bit about where I come from and kind of the context in which I grew up. I'm from a tiny town that no one's ever heard about in southern Michigan. A lot of trades folks, dairy farmers. And so I share that because we didn't have a single therapist. There was not, if you said therapist, they may assume a physical therapist, but there was no such thing as, going to see a counselor. Or someone for mental health. We had one pediatrician, so pick your poison. um, and so, but interestingly, growing up in that small town, I found myself, of course, into sports, but I loved to read. I loved to at an early age, I remember trying to understand group dynamics and motivation, whether it was on a sports team, why does this play out, or in, family systems. And, it wasn't something that I, forced myself into. It's just it's the way my mind worked, and kind of.
That's one of the things I love about you. You are just one of the most inquisitive minds and analytical. You like to figure and problem solve, and you like to just understand. And I just see that brain whirring sometimes. I'm like, what is Damon thinking in there? Especially since, spoiler alert for later, since we've got to work together more recently.
That's right.
In therapeutic context. It's just wonderful to collaborate and to see that way that works. So I'm not surprised to hear that this went back all the way to childhood, growing up in the small town. All right.
It did, and I appreciate that compliment. It's a gift and a curse at times, but
Yeah.
I did notice, it's not. I didn't have a conception of a therapist because, like I said, we didn't have those. But I knew that I had this interest. I like to read about what makes people tick, philosophy, what constitutes the good life from a variety of different sources. And as I sort of got through grade school and high school, I that interest just strengthened. And then probably the series of events that really propelled me first into becoming a therapist was a series of tragedies and losses, the harshest and most painful. And there is no full resolution of grief. It's a constant work in progress. So but the toughest was the abrupt death of my mother when I was 17. And in my maternal family system, there was a series of suicides as well. And so a lot of death in a short period of time. In my young mind, as I was heading out to college and having to think about majors and career paths, I was sort of trapped and frozen in a lot of trauma and loss. What I did know is when I transitioned to college that I have to find a way to honor my mother. She actually, before she passed, did become the first licensed counselor in our area. So that was a wonderful moment, wonderful to see while she was still alive. But that from my innate interest around kind of what makes people tick, how do you help folks, or the community I'm from is very sort of blue collar but very service oriented. You help your neighbors. And so to honor my mother, I thought, well, I have to become a therapist or a counselor or a psychologist, and try to stand for and help use this loss in some productive way, in other words. And so that was long-winded, but that that landed
No,
me
no,
in,
thank you.
yeah, different spaces to study psychology.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing about Patricia Crone. What a
Mm,
lady. What a lady.
thank you.
That's wonderful. I don't know. I'm sure you've told me, but slipped the mind that she was the first counselor in that area. That's wonderful. Or female counselor.
Yeah,
Was it the first counselor entirely, or the first female counselor?
the first counselor in Jonesville, but the first female counselor in the county, or the
That's
village we called
amazing.
it. Yeah.
The village. Different states are so weird,
Yeah,
with their counties and their villages and their parishes and their
yeah,
townships. Just
that's
everyone
right.
trying to separate each other in
That's
different ways.
right.
But
Tribalism.
no,
Yeah.
as you notice from a young age, it pops up everywhere. But no, that's inspiring. You got my mind worrying about a lot of things, but I want to keep on with the narrative. But yeah, I can see how that would be extremely transformative, and how you felt this called, the way I like to think of it. I know I've shared this with you, is turn your tears into diamonds.
Yeah.
How do we find something valuable in our pain and our grief and our loss? And I just turn to that time and time again, and I lose sight of it and just sometimes cry the tears, but often I can take that pain and do something with it, whether that's a hard workout or a piece of poetry or a song or an act of service, or in your case, it turned into kind of, the hard work of a career path. So what happened education wise after that? What happened education wise?
Yeah, so I was sort of stuck and frozen, kind of my senior year of high school, and I played sports well enough to land at Kalamazoo College. It's a private school, private liberal arts school in Kalamazoo, and that was helpful because I could be close to my brother and sister who were at Western Michigan University, which is just right across the street. So, but since day one of college, freshman year, I took every psychology course. I fell in love with it. Of course, I meandered like most during college at times, but I really felt a strong conviction that there is beauty in taking the pain and the tragedy and trauma, and number one, knowing it's gonna be a process, and number two, part of that process could, what a gift, be a way to help others. Now there's lots of tricky dynamics because you have to be very thoughtful about why one becomes a therapist, number one, but number two, what
Yeah.
types of folks you treat. There's many requirements. Number one, in my opinion, like deep work on one's own. But
Yeah. Yeah.
the conviction just increased, and that led me to move into Chicago and to start a master's at Northwestern's Family Institute, where I was fortunate to meet some incredible therapists and scholars and leaders, and interestingly, many folks now who either their ideas or some of the models they've developed are now being utilized quite a bit in psychedelic assisted therapies. So it is quite interesting to see it come full circle, and think about how yeah, one moment, and I guess a series of moments in a small town led to the space I'm in now. It's life is weird.
Yeah. Life is really weird. And how cool that you kind of saw some of those seeds from the early part of your education starting to bloom in ways that you might not have guessed now, as you've kind of transitioned into working with psychedelic therapies, which I want to get into more. But first, just briefly, can you tell me some of the populations you worked with? Because I just think it's unique, your story, because I do know them, but I don't want to say anything wrong or misrepresent. But I think the what am I trying to say here? The trajectory of your populations that you worked with, I
Yeah.
just think is interesting. And I think about that with my own career in medicine a lot, and how I started out and where I'm at and where I'm heading. And yeah, I'm curious if you can just share with the listeners what populations you kind of went with over time until getting into where we are now.
Certainly. My first internship was at a company called Scholarship and Guidance. Now it's called SGA Youth and Family Services. It was actually started by Jane Addams, a massive figure in social work. And why I share that is because that landed me in two different Chicago public schools, one on the southwest side and one on the west side. And as you can imagine, in schools where it's a lot of low income, disenfranchised communities, I stuck out like a sore thumb, which was so imperative as an experience to realize how countless times I'm not placed in that position, and how I'm often given neutral or positive assumptions just by external variables. So that experience was incredibly helpful because I started out thinking I wanted to treat high risk teens. That also is deeply embedded. My mother and kind of the town I grew up in had some. It's not explicit, but we would talk about no stone unturned, don't sleep on anyone, and so I wanted my first training to be in really tough situations with really tough populations who would really challenge me to have therapeutic alliance and rapport given rightful resistance and conflict about seeing someone like myself. And so that point has come full circle because I really believe that how difficult that experience is, yet consequently how I still think about some of those patients, how unbelievably rewarding it's been to know that despite every objective difference, you can still find a way to connect with folks. So that really laid a foundation of understanding the importance of context and the situations folks have to navigate, their resources, but most importantly for me, as someone who has mainly seen folks individually throughout the years, how absolutely priceless and imperative therapeutic alliance and having trust. Everyone, including someone who doesn't look like me, talk like me, think like me, have the privileges and opportunities that I've had, has a fundamental need to be seen. And so that experiment one was really such a wonderful way to test myself on could I connect with folks who have, to no fault of their own, been in really tough places most of their lives.
You really threw yourself into the fire.
It was
Start with Chicago public schools. Where else would you start fresh out of school?
that's right. That's right.
Throw yourself into the fire. No, that's how you go. And I can totally see how that, like, you can context the weather, the school system, the community that you're in. It is easy to lose touch with, but being in a helping profession where you see people from different walks of life can, I think, really keep you grounded in that context, privilege, and the lack of privilege and adversity. And I bet, I did a similar thing going in with underserved populations right away.
That's right.
While I do have concerns about it sometimes, that it is better to ease in and go slow. I wouldn't change it either. I wouldn't change the way I did it, and I wouldn't change going in with so much youth and fire and passion and trying to make the biggest difference, even if I have battle wounds from it, as I'm sure you do. And I just think about the full circle. You keep saying, about you raising two boys now, and just what that experience is like, and and how I'm sure some seeds were planted there that are now blooming with your fathering so long later. Life is a funny thing.
It truly is. And to your point, I look back on it as the absolute right place to start, though I can't paint a rosy picture. I was equivocating and pondering life and having existential crises, wondering if I can do this, certainly for some time. But it did.
Right. And where'd you go after that?
Yeah, it really helped. I went to community mental health was the second placement, and that was helpful because it showed me how to have a framing and a treatment approach for folks who most were also low income populations, but folks who have lots of comorbidity, trauma, treatment resistant depression, anxiety, often comorbid substance abuse issues, substance dependence at times, and how to help folks who have been ignored by the system for a long time, and so they come in and have, again, to no fault of their own, 20 presenting issues that haven't been addressed in years, and really honed my assessment skills, and also taught me the resilience of folks who keep working at it, keep coming back to the table, keep believing in themselves despite odds. So that context really started to help some of my not traditional private practice, but it helped. It was a traditional office setting as opposed to I'd meander down the halls at Chicago public schools, and we'd have to find any location, sometimes borrow offices. So, but the community mental health was really an entry, and thinking about how do you assess and help people who are in dire need when there's a long list of issues that you could start with. So that experience was so helpful because we learned, collaborative work together, and you really started to think about how do you prioritize the issues people present with in a way that helps them find relief as responsibly, but as quickly, as rapidly as possible. So that was a great experience, and it was right after that where I started my private practice, seeing folks individually. To be completely frank, started it quite early, like right after being licensed, in part to help pay for student loans. So some of it was out of necessity. I mean, I absolutely loved the work, and so I saw folks in private practice, and then transitioned for over a decade in university counseling at a professional institution. And I'll stop there. That was long-winded, but that gives you a synopsis.
Oh, thank you. That's what I asked. That's what I asked for. No, I think it is really interesting. We see this a lot, at least I see it a lot with healing professionals. For whatever reason, you do either go where the needs most, where where there's access issues, where it's a low barrier to entry, where you can kind of cut your teeth, for better or worse. You have, some of the highest passion, but maybe some of the least wisdom. You have, when you have new professionals, but at least in my profession, and where I've seen it with other physician assistants or different medical communities, it's not uncommon. The same way, you have teaching hospitals where you're having residents and stuff, seeing so many patients, and it's just part of the system and how skills grow. And I think it's important that it is kind of at that ground up, and you see so much. I heard you speak kind of on the societal traumas and the issues that just happen societally outside of anyone's individual nature, genetics, even behaviors, from being, let's say, in a disenfranchised population, or from struggling with, more societal pressures. And and how you found out how to get that trust is huge, and that is the key. I think you might agree to the therapeutic relationship. I'd say that's it. No, I wouldn't just want to ask. Would you say that's the foundation of a therapeutic relationship, or is there anything even more deep than the trust between the client and the patient?
It's a great
the client and the provider.
It's a great question, because I should say my training is very psychodynamic. So I did a fellowship at local analytic institutes. I did a PhD and psychoanalytic social work clinical practice, which really looks at contemporary psychoanalytic techniques that help folks in private practice. So, and in Northwest,
some examples of that. Can you give some examples? Help with the psychoanalytic, psychodynamic. Help us understand, some of what that means, so it doesn't just sound like some, therapeutic mumbo jumbo.
Yeah. So they're psychoanalytic. Most folks, associate to Freud, certainly. And while Freud got some brilliant observations and certainly was a genius, he got a lot of things right. He also got many things wrong that I won't expound on,
Okay.
in part because of his own issues and being a product of his context and time. But
And a lot
so,
of cocaine.
a
I'm sure a lot of
lot of
cocaine probably helped.
cocaine. Yeah, he's a consultant on The Wire. No, no, it's where some of that model assumed that you lie on a couch 5 times a week and talk about and free associate to your deepest, darkest desires and fears, and you talk about dreams a lot. Now, the while that approach is not used and not an approach I used, the assumption of Freud was that the unconscious, if you think about your daily life, a more probably practical way to think about it is most of our lives are spent on autopilot. And what we know about that is our experiences from the past imbue every aspect of the choices we make in the present, our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, even the partners we choose. From a contemporary psychodynamic approach, we don't have folks lie on the couch 5 times a week and pontificate. We help them understand how the unconscious mind clings to what's familiar, what one used for safety measures. You see this a lot in trauma. What one used to protect oneself in the past that was a survival mechanism, but no longer is being adaptive and helping one be amenable to change and new opportunities. And familial. The unconscious is driven by what's familial. We often recreate roles, responsibilities, dynamics that we had to play from childhood in the present. And it could be in the present with our initial family system, or it could be in the present with our partners, and loved ones. So the idea of my training in psychodynamic theory and the way I think about it is when someone comes to see me, of course we care about symptoms, presenting issues, and as you know, Dee, we take a holistic approach. We think about every aspect that could be contributing to one's symptoms, medical, physical, and consciousness or spiritual. However, if you just, in psychodynamic theory, the way I'm trained assumes this, if you just stay on the surface, you don't address the underlying roots, the drivers of those symptoms. And so why that speaks to me is because patients risk a lot and risk humility, risk being let down again, risk losing hope that this time can be the time I can change. And so we as providers owe it to them to take a no stone unturned approach and, in my opinion, try to uproot and attack the underlying factors that drive their symptoms. So that's my training. To your question, and this will come together. The therapeutic alliance, which is so imperative, and what that first internship taught me is the therapeutic alliance has to be established, and techniques fail unless that is established. But also, what I found over the years is that the therapeutic alliance is bolstered and supported, and there's so much more buy in if people feel seen around attacking the unconscious factors that drive their symptoms. It's been empowering for them, in other words. I want folks to become their own examiners, their own therapists. We don't want people in therapy forever.
That's huge. I'm so glad you said that. That empowering mindset, I think, is crucial, and I can see how that relates to trust here, because whether I'm just off the top of that here, but this is clicking something for me. Whether the practitioner understands this or not, and most likely they wouldn't, it would be happening subconsciously, they could very easily, by wanting to help, be creating a victim in front of them and actually be perpetuating a victim-helper relationship while, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but while at the same time having no intention of doing this and truly thinking they are helping the person. Is that right?
Certainly, certainly,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you see it a lot in trauma where someone has a heinous, egregious experience no one should go through. My wife has experienced some of these moments, and while you have to develop a therapeutic alliance, meet them where they're at, you also have to help them reestablish their agency. Because if you've been through the hell of trauma, I promise you're strong enough to go through what feels like the hell of transformation, even in the darkest moments. I see this a lot with, speaking of my practice, I started treating a lot of physicians. I started to treat a lot of vets and first responders out of my interest to take on tough cases and try to help folks move the needle when they felt like there were few, if any options. And so you see this with vets where if they have so much resilience and courage against every single odd, and they come through and fight. So but to your point, it's really about prioritizing initially connection and trust as opposed to technique. We need techniques, but as a mentor who passed over the past year, Dennis McCaughan, he was brilliant, and I was fortunate enough to train under him. He would say, while theory is the ideal, it's often not the real. And so we have to have alliance and rapport, and have to have folks be seen and know that we'll fight for them.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. And that's something I just keep coming back to as I mature into my career, still being, a young healthcare provider, and as I, go into different avenues of helping people and try on different hats. One thing I keep getting struck by is just this relationship that develops in the power of roles and the power of having a role, in a defined role in a therapeutic relationship, outside of whatever it is you're doing, outside of whatever you're offering, in which which knowledge base you're going, which technique you're using. I've found that there does seem to be a healing effect or an enhancing effect or a potential therapeutic effect just from having those roles: patient, therapist, guide, follower, whatever it is. I was hoping you could speak to that, especially through the lens of transference and countertransference. And I promise I want to get to where we are today, but I know that's an area that you, looked at more intensely.
Yeah.
And I know I've learned a lot from you in the past around it. During our original sessions, I was, sitting there across from you like, what's this transference and countertransference? A little bit, looking out for it already. And I know that you just have a lens on it. So tell me about that relationship through those lenses.
It's a great question and complicated, and I'll try not to bore you too much.
Yeah.
But where my mind goes is so Tim Spalla, who's a vet and a gifted therapist. He started a nonprofit, wounded healers, and he would say, we're all wounded healers. And so why I share that is because to understand the relationship between a client and a therapist deeply, and there's always parts that we don't understand. There's always parts that are left unexamined, but it behooves us to examine the parts that we at least can. Is that you have to have, in my opinion, a lot of intensive work for yourself. I think to be a gifted healer or therapist or provider, I think you have to look at the darkness, the traumas, the ways in which you've had to survive and protect yourself. And of course, when you're practicing, there's ongoing therapy and consultation and ongoing support. It always helps to have an outside perspective. But I think what point you're getting at is whether it's client or patient or partner versus partner, our life
Mm-hmm.
history and our particular perception and our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, our own version of autopilot that differs from the other's version gets played out unconsciously in every single dynamic, whether it's a helper and someone coming for treatment or whether it's two partners trying to resolve a conflict. In other words, when the dynamics are imbued in the past and always very complicated, to your point, and you do such a great job at this, it makes the necessity to communicate clearly and as thoughtfully as you can, knowing that my reaction is in part because of what I feel my partner said or did, but also, and it's hard for us to admit this, but also something entirely about what's playing out with me. And transference and countertransference is sort of the most salient, complicated example of that in a therapy context. And
Mm-hmm.
what we have to do is make sure we're helping folks and not trying to resolve our own issues in the context of treatment.
Yeah, thank you. No, I love that parallel here with relationships, romantic relationships, let's say, and then like the therapeutic relationship. And just hearing that way in which we can project our own things onto others. And I
I've
think
never lost a
some would say
fight.
that's always.
I've never been wrong. No, okay, God no.
I, I'll get your wife in on this one. Surprise guest. We're gonna
Yeah.
Jerry Springer you over here.
She, she
We got him. We got him. Get in here.
sleeping on the
Yeah.
couch. Yeah.
No, I wouldn't do that to you. Transfer yourself to the couch with that transference. No, that makes a lot of sense in the therapeutic relationship. That transference of whatever it is. Wanting someone to be a savior, so you build them up to be a savior, or wanting to help someone, so you build them down to be a victim, and you have to save them. It's so interesting, all this projecting we're doing, and I love thinking about us as dirty projectors. There's a band with that name, and it just really resonates with me, because it's like we have these lenses that we're seeing the world through, and there's smudges all over them. And I remember talking to you about this theory, basically, of this in session back way in the Midwestern days, and as I was trying to just come to terms with what being a human was, as I was really wrestling with this stuff and just seeing all these different lenses. I don't see one set of glasses. I see like panes of moving lenses. It's not easy to tell, and they all have different smudges on them and different shades and tints. And that's your personality, that's your karma, that's your trauma, that's all the past experiences you've had and the deep desires that you don't know you have, and all these things are just filtering and coloring the world that you see. But you don't see those. They're moving, they're hard to tell. You don't see your lenses. So for me, therapy is a lot about clearing the lenses, and hopefully one day getting closer to seeing things as they, are. You always have some lens. I'm not trying to say we can get to the absolute, but I can see how this model makes perfect sense in a romantic relationship, maybe even more saliently than in the therapeutic relationship. Who's not, throwing stuff onto their partners? And one of the tenets of our work here with helping the herd is the 4 agreements and not taking anything personally. Who doesn't take it personally with their partner? It's
Right.
literally part of the definition.
Sir, a heck of an ideal, right?
Yeah, if only. If only.
Truly, but I think what I hear is that it's so complicated, and the more intense the reaction, whether it's because of a trauma situation or whether it's a diet or family therapy situation or intensity related to someone feeling triggered around some conversation or some interaction with another, the more likely it is related to something deeply personal. And
Mm-hmm.
the more likely that concern has been covered, has been repressed, dissociated, and it's easy for. I remember I supervised a lot of therapists, and I fell into this too in my early years. It's easy to get sort of enchanted with the being idealized, number one, or having the magic fix, being seen as all knowing. And while we have to be extremely thoughtful about interventions and how we help people, yeah, there has to be necessary conflict. People have to wrestle with their mind because it's in the space of that wrestling where they realize that I have been on autopilot. And to your point, there's 50 different ways to look at the world, and I've been entrenched in this particular one, oftentimes out of survival. So the dialogue moving back and forth to a place where people can where necessary conflict is introduced so people can realize there is a better way to think about this, and maybe my reaction is in part related to some deep wound I have. I think we empower patients by helping them be cognizant and catch themselves in those moments. That's the beauty really of couples work, I think.
Well said. Well said. We say this often on the podcast. Frequent listeners will know this one. Conflict is a good thing. Conflict is a good thing. That's just what you're speaking to here, and it can be done poorly or well, and it can be productive or not. But it is that catalyst for change, like you're saying, for someone to really just change the way they see things, and it can be extremely valuable. And I'm almost seeing the parallel between therapist and artist. I think about art often as the softening of painful subject, difficult subject, in a way that is palatable, digestible, and can, if someone's open and receptive, change the way they see the world. Like death being, portrayed through art in a way that lets us cry and sob and then feel better and lighter afterwards and more full of life. And that's only done by, softening the rough edges. I'm seeing therapists as artists here with the same thing.
It's a beautiful way to think about it. I agree. And while I won't show you my stick figure ability to create art, I do think it's an art and it's a dance, and that's why I think it's so important to always go back to the client, because you can be too wedded to one strategy versus the other at the expense of what that person needs. Everyone is different. Everyone you can have, and we need, copious strategies to think about helping folks. But if you don't speak to that person and what strategies could help them, it's almost like they're trying to create something artistically, and you're not able to see what they need. So it's almost like a pre-formulated attempt when they're trying to create, and creating a better life and thinking about how to change is contingent on finding the right puzzle piece that speaks directly to that person's personality, how their lived experiences shape their present, and what they need to really move the needle. That's been the neat thing, especially with really treatment resistant cases, egregious trauma, is trying to, in a safe way, of course, but in a rapid way, try to find the genesis, or the real pain and trauma that is perpetuating a lot of symptoms.
Wow, yeah. Well, I'm so glad you talked about the ethical, moral imperative for a therapist to, do their own inner work because of these dynamics you're talking about, because of, whether that's transference and countertransference, or just the privilege of being inside someone's, mind, their space, what they're sharing with you while they're going through these, potentially transformative things. The therapist does have the potential to guide that one way or the other, and that's an incredible responsibility. And nowhere is that more so than I think with psychedelic therapy, which, we've been through some of the journey here. Can you tell me how you ended up finding yourself, interested in psychedelic therapy, and what these most recent years have been like for you?
Yeah, certainly. There are professional reasons and personal. Um, and I'll try to make this quick or as quick as possible.
Mm.
But on the professional side,
We got all the time in the world, my friend. We
that's
got all the time in the world.
I appreciate that. On the professional side, because I my own history included tragic loss and suicide. My own history constituted a mindset where I wish I could have gone back to prevent tragedy
Mm.
and death. That over time, from a training perspective, led me to really want to help folks with serious mental health issues, often depression, suicide, comorbid substance abuse issues. And so
Mm.
I had always been interested, and I'm a huge nerd, so I love to read. And I'd always been interested
Mm.
less on the exact technique, because a lot of our therapy camps can go into their own corners and ultimately say many of the same things, but couch them in different ways. So
Mm.
I I knew that because of my clinical interests and having cases where you really need to find ways to find relief pretty quickly. You don't have
Mm.
5 times a
Mm.
week on the couch to think and reflect and to free associate. I've always been interested on the latest research articles that could help really expedite relief in the first 4 sessions in particular.
Yeah,
Um,
you don't always have the luxury of time like we have today, right? If you have someone with active suicidal ideation, you can't, promise this is going to get better a few months from now. Keep coming back once a week or once every 2 weeks, right? Yeah, it's a very different, the way most of us think of therapy. I think it's easy to forget about rapid intervention and the need for, more acute care almost, and just the whole spectrum that opens up from there. So that's really elucidating.
uh, Absolutely. And that, whether it was a vet or a physician or a cancer survivor, helping folks who really needed some immediate relief for different reasons became just almost a personal challenge. And so that led to Roland Griffiths's papers when he
Mhm.
resuscitated psilocybin, initially for terminal cancer patients having, of course, rightfully so, immense existential fear. And that just exploded my interest. And wow, this I first off, I was naive to that. I mean, I'd heard about, what happened in Harvard in the 50s, and I'd heard a
Yeah.
little bit about psychedelics, but that was not, a part of the training. It was not something we talked
Mm.
about. And so I saw this paper by this legend, rest in peace now, Roland,
Mm.
where the data was outrageous. And since my interest was trying to figure out how to move the needle pretty quickly for folks, I thought I got to explore this more. So that led to just a deep dive into the data on psychedelics, the utility of psychedelics. It wasn't a coincidence. I started to notice over time that they seemed particularly helpful for the cases some folks in the psychology cycles don't want to treat: the depression, the trauma, the
Mm.
traumatic brain injury, you see first
Mm.
responders and vets, of course, navigating a lot of this. Just really tough cases, and it behooves us to help, especially those folks, in my opinion. So I thought I have to dive into this more, and the more I dove into it, the more I realized that my own unconscious, conceptions of psychedelics was largely from messaging.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's
The
complicated,
DARE
but
program.
yeah, Dare
You know
Dare worked
the
well.
DARE program.
Scared me.
LS LSD will fry your brain. This is an egg. This is your egg on acid. It's fried egg. No, this is really lighting me up. You're really bringing me back to where some of my psychedelic interests first started, around a similar time. With Roland Griffith's work, and I just remember at Midwestern, needing to do my thesis, like a master's thesis research project, and just being so blown away with the psychedelic therapy research. Just like, why is no one talking about this? Where has this been? And we won't get into that, but there obviously are reasons why, and you can dive deep into the socio-cultural history of it, and it is pretty fascinating what's happened, and why these incredibly promising therapies from as way back as 30s, 20s, even with huge numbers of people helped, kind of fell into the recession. And then thank you for giving me my next ska band name, the Psilocybin Resuscitation. I'll be jamming with the boys later about that, and I'm sure we'll be going on tour soon. It's a name like that, you just
sounds
have to.
electric and destined for Lollapalooza.
Oh yeah, the Psilocybin Resuscitation. You will get royalties.
I appreciate
But I
that.
remember that whenever I saw the research, I didn't want to study anything else. And I went into my advisor at the time, and off camera, we might have to talk about who that was. But it was hilarious. But I went in, at the time, and tried to present, this is what I'm going to do my research on. They're like, you can't do that. And I'm like, why is that? And it wasn't conspiratorial, it wasn't, but it was just kind of some institutional lag, some whatever it is. And, I had to, smush it into the larger topic of alternative treatments for anxiety and depression. But in that, paper this thick, this much of it was about the psilocybin. We had some horse therapy, we had some art therapy, and then I got to tell you guys about this research, and it was incredible.
You
I
get one
that
sentence
really
to write. Despite enormous, groundbreaking effect sizes, psilocybin is not popularly received. No, but that, to your point, that's right. That I'm not shocked by that.
Yeah. So that really lit your candle. You started going there, and then how did you find yourself actually practicing in this once you followed the research?
Yeah. So it was really my wife's cancer diagnosis in 2019, and thank God she's in remission and just as pugnacious as ever. No, no, just as absolute. I mean, she's flying. She is the
You're
most.
getting yourself closer and closer to the couch, which is very
She
appropriate for a therapist.
she is.
It's not lost on me.
But in all honesty, you know she's the most incredible, resilient, smart. Like get if you're equivocating, Damon, like look at the hell I've been through. Get it together. Let's go. Like what an inspiration. Sometimes pugnacious, but that's only tiny piece of it. It was 2019 during, and so I'm looking at all this data and compiling all this data and just dumbfounded with every study. Now we have multiple institutions looking at some of the initial trials, replicating the studies. The data is just as legit. So I'm compiling that over the years because I thought I don't know what to do with this yet, given the scheduling and what has played out. Obviously, though exciting that Texas and Ibogaine is coming. I didn't know what to do with it until I had a resuscitation of some of the nightmares that I experienced during my mother's death when my wife was getting her treatment, chemo, radiation, copious surgeries, and no amount of therapy. I've had the privilege of having just incredible therapists, and I'm obviously one of the biggest proponents for therapy, but nothing seemed to be able to touch what could stop or ameliorate those nightmares and just this constant fear that my wife is going through something that if I'm trained as a therapist, I can't possibly understand. And also, I could lose the most important person in my life outside of my two kids. And so it was a jumbled, yeah.
Damon, that had to be just so, obviously I know this, but oh, you meet it with new eyes every time, and just I can just see how incredibly difficult that situation is where you are being met with, the perfect or the antonym of perfect parallel to your mother's loss and the fears that that would just bring right back up with your life partner there. And I just, with knowing you, it's kind of obvious now, but just how painful it must have been to be trying your best to help her through this, while at the same time needing so much help yourself. How could you not? You're dealing with something impossible, and then having to be both the protector and the person who needs protected. And it's such an impossible situation. I just want to, before you go into where that led you, I just want to commend you for how you did show up through that. I was privileged to know you through that, and to see you during that time, and it's just been a constant source of inspiration for me and how I want to show up in my life. So you really navigated it so well, so well.
I appreciate that so much, because and you've had maternal loss, and so when you've dealt with a fundamental loss like that, left is right, up is down, and the thought of losing someone who has just been the North Star, was too much for my psyche. So fast forward, on a personal level, I knew that I couldn't show up for her and continue to show up for my patients, because my strategy at that time, pre my own personal experience with psychedelics, which I can talk about, my strategy at that time was the same strategy my 17-year-old mind adopted when I came up to the crash scene and saw my mother's car sprayed all over the intersection. My strategy was, I can deal with the loss, or in my wife's case, the threat of loss, by saving every damn patient who presents to me. Child's play.
You threw yourself into the work. You threw yourself into work, right?
Threw myself into the work. And so next thing I know, I refused to miss an appointment she had, but in the meantime, I have a larger caseload. I'm burning out. Trying to keep it together. The kids, they're so incredible and have like more social calendar activities than I've ever had. It's wild. So trying to keep the ship afloat. And then I had a breaking moment, and of course, COVID hits. More folks are in need. And just had a breaking moment where I thought back to that stack of research papers and said, if I'm someone who believes that you need to look at the data and really have a very idiosyncratic, not a one size fits all, tailored approach for every client I'm fortunate enough and privileged enough to see, I should listen to my own damn medicine. And so that led to me seeking out and having my own psychedelic experience that expedited a lot of personal healing during that time.
You listen to the medicine. You listen to the medicine. That's a good way of describing the psychedelics. That's wonderful. Yeah. If you, just because of time, I'm not going to ask you to get into your psychedelic experience. So
Sure.
I am curious, but maybe do share, kind of the takeaway. You said it really expedited things, which is everything the research shows. So maybe I will. But tell us at least the takeaway.
Yeah, I think the takeaway for me was that it seemed like the key to unlock and then work in concert with my training. In other words, Freud, despite all of our feelings about him, he called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. Rather, and after IPI, having an incredible psychedelic practitioner training program, and I'm still, I've been fortunate to have people who have been in this space a heck of a lot longer than I. But what I realized is that rather than dreams being the royal road, I think psychedelics are the expedited route to the unconscious. And so there are no illusions with psychedelics, and obviously set and setting, integration, especially rule-ins and rule-outs. We have to control thoughtfully and meticulously all the variables we can. But what I learned is that, wow, I've been trained on a model that assumes that the unconscious and the past and that our symptoms are representative of factors that are driving our symptoms. Not that we don't attend to symptoms, but I have found a neuroplastic agent that can dive straight to the unconscious and help people understand what issues from the past, what traumas, what moments that they may be replaying out in the present but not consciously aware of. It gave me a tool to go right to the very system that was once used for survival mechanisms, but now is precluding the person from what you said earlier, different perspectives, looking at different shades of paint, getting off of autopilot. And I thought, there's not a better way when done thoughtfully to work that model in concert with my training.
How wonderful! Yeah, if dreams are the royal road, it's like psychedelics are the autobahn to the unconscious. You can just really just get there, and I can see just how it all lines up with your, wanting to help people in that expedited way. This desire to save or at least help as so many people as you can for various reasons. That you're, I think come from a high place and from, being honest, just a projection of what you need to feel like you have some control in a world that's out of control. And I love that you're open about that. I love that you're open about this. Some people try to walk around and act like everything is just sainthood, but at the end of the day, we're all at war between our, the better angels of our nature and the lesser angels of our nature. Let's not invoke any devils here, but we all are human and we have these different desires and needs. And I just love that you've found a way to make these compatible and especially that you found that way to click with how you could use the skills you've built with psychedelics, because I think that's a really difficult part of it. With great power comes great responsibility, right? And like we said, so that therapeutic integrity is more important than ever whenever you're having these neuroplastic agents, when you're using the fast road, but also just having the right approach and knowing how to do that. That takes a lot of courage and obviously a lot of training. You went through intensive training to become a licensed in psychedelic therapy. So, but then to find your own approach with all the, you are the most brilliant therapist I've worked with even before going into psychedelic therapy. And I was very lucky to have you at the time that I did. And so curious to see how you take all that training, all that experience, all these different populations, and then you put the gasoline onto this, approach that you have, and you're like, all right, we're really going to turn it up. That's a big thing. And yeah, I admire the willingness to go into that. And then, right now you're doing it. You're doing the stuff. You've actually, implemented this. What do you want to tell the listeners about what you're doing these days and where you hope to go with this incredible therapy?
Yeah, no, well, thank you for that. First and foremost, it's what you said about me is something I respect so much and appreciate about you. So it's lovely to hear that. We need those reminders, like that East Forest song reminder. Gets me every time. Yeah, it does. And one quick point there. What has been really neat too is that there's a lot of press around psychedelics because of their power. But to your point, with great power comes great responsibility. One of the incredible pieces is using psychedelics now at a company I founded called Monarch Neuroscience and the Monarch Protocols, which in which we really try to have innovative, safe, effective ways to help folks with recovery from symptoms, address long-standing issues. In short, we help vets, we help cancer survivors, first responders, adults in high performance situations, lots of folks who have depression, trauma, comorbidity. In short, to your point, it dovetails nice with my interests. But the wonderful thing, and what I am so pleased about Monarch with, is the use of psychedelics has just corroborated to me the importance of psychotherapy. Psychedelics are a tool, but if you don't focus, especially with a powerful neuroplastic agent, if you don't focus on therapy, in intense preparation, integration. This brings me back to my roots. Couldn't treat someone in CPS if they didn't have money for a bus ticket. So you have to think
That's right.
about preparation. Integration in community mental health. You can't ask someone and suggest a technique if it doesn't work in concert with how they have to return to the world Monday through Friday with their particular idiosyncratic life situation. So the wonderful thing is that the rather than getting caught up in the hype of and the hype is real. I cannot wait for the world to see in a very thoughtful, calculated way what's to come with psychedelics, but it has bolstered the conviction that if you do the right thing and from a therapy perspective and use these neuroplastic agents at particular moments to benefit that expedited route, the autobahn, like you said, and stay cognizant of this person has to go back to work on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Wonderful, wonderful things have happened to date. Not to boast, but I just mean to prioritize the model and use these in a very thoughtful way with the foundation and backbone of good therapy and good therapeutic work.
Yeah, I love that emphasis, and I'll boast for you. I've obviously seen the data from Monarch, and then I've been very lucky to, like I mentioned earlier, collaborate with you in the retreat setting and see just incredible transformation. Maybe metamorphosis is an appropriate word for Monarch. I think metamorphosis facilitated by these substances, and like you're saying, just that's what I got to see in person. So much around the therapy, and it's almost like I think of judo, I think of aikido or martial arts. It's all about directing energy. So it doesn't matter if you have two 500-pound sumo wrestlers, in the ring. Nothing may happen if their energy is opposed and matched, but it doesn't matter how big the guns you're using is what I'm saying versus psychedelic therapy or traditional therapy. It's about how you move the energy. And if one of those sumo wrestlers is able to manipulate the energy and get it going one direction, something very incredible may happen, something earth-shaking, literally, if a sumo wrestler is thrown, and metaphorically in your mind, if the energy is used in the right way. And that's what the therapy is. That's what the set and setting is. That's what the container is. And it's just so wonderful to look back. And that's why I'm glad you took us through kind of your journey as a therapist and a person to see how all those pieces click now with what you're doing, the complex care. That's what I heard earlier, the complex care of community mental health, the trust building and the safety and the considerations of the full context from CPS and everywhere, and how that all just comes together to this, what seems to me like you really found your niche of this personalized therapy that takes the complexity, takes the context, and tries your best to let that energy go in the direction where it's most helpful for the client.
And that's way more succinct than I could. That's no, that's lovely because what I've learned is that if people feel understood, seen, recognized on a deep level,
Yeah.
and have trust, and even if they know they're signing up, say they're psychedelic naive, have enough trust based on the work and the prep that and the assessment that one has done, they are they are amenable to going right to some of those long-standing issues that they have some sense of but can't necessarily sink their teeth in. And when you can prioritize and tailor the treatment and the interventions, and as you know, we use lots of different interventions to that specific person because everyone needs something a little bit different. And if you can bolster their growth, to your point, the way my mind works in images often, and a lot of folks, the image I like to use is if you wake up every day and your symptoms and the struggles you have feel like you look up every day and stare at Mount Kilimanjaro, and one step at a time feels like you're climbing up the mountain. Psychotherapy and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy done thoughtfully and in a tailored way can launch people to the top of Kilimanjaro and give them choice and space to see which route they may want to go down. And so, but to your point, if you're at the top of the mountain, you have to be darn sure you're extremely thoughtful and calculated about how to utilize that energy, to your earlier point.
Absolutely. A lot of potential energy from the top of the mountain.
That's
A lot
right.
of
That's
potential
right.
energy.
I can't ski, so you know where I'm going.
Oh boy. Not well. Yeah, that's another good way of putting I guess therapy in general, like teaching you how to ski. There's always going to be something you have to flow with, and you. I'm just really lit up by this. I'm really grateful that I've got the chance to work with you professionally. Use a lot of different therapies and approaches, but we've got to collaborate already some with ketamine therapy specifically, where I got certified with Prodi. Can't recommend that organization enough. Wonderful training with Prodi, the Psychedelic Research and Training Institute in Colorado, and since collaborated, and it's just a joy to get to see the different approaches together and to collaborate with other providers, and just the stuff that's going on with Monarch just lights me up more than anything. And I'm just really thankful to be a part of that. And I want to give listeners, a chance, if they want to check that out, to check us out, themonarchprotocols.com, right?
That's right. That's right. And no, really, and if there's questions, what I've appreciated about the model and what I've appreciated about working with you is, and not that others aren't like this, is that at our mission is multi-determined and has many parts to it, but our base is trying to create solid foundations so people can fly and navigate the world on their own, and that requires someone who I believe is moral, of course, does the right thing, but is immensely humble and tries to always do right by patients, and that comes through every part of you and what we try to do. So check it out, folks, and if you're interested, please, we wouldn't lead you astray if it's not the right treatment for you. So we'd be happy to talk and answer any questions.
Yeah, no, please. If it's okay with you, Damon, I'll leave your email in the comments as well as this, as well as, of course, the URL for Monarch. Reach out however you like. Awesome. Thank you for that. And, that's one thing that you are very, very meticulous about. I've seen you turn down so many clients because you aren't willing to take unnecessary risk. You really do respect this, and that's why I'm so thankful to work with you. And it's incredible, and I like that you explained that you have a wide range of people you can treat with this. I like that you didn't just narrow yourself into one bucket when developing the protocols, that it is including that area that you don't see too much yet in the research because it's not the area to be triaged, but the terrible name for it in research, betterment of healthy normals, or something similar. But what Monarch, I think, calls it more best self protocol. Who doesn't want help being their best self and showing up for their relationships, their work, themselves, whatever that is? And so I love that it goes from all ranges of clinical need to, do you want help being your best self? Like, that's also something we can do. It's very destigmatizing as well when people think about, again, with stigma going full circle, people think about it as though I need help with something. Why do I need help? Well, maybe you just want support to be your best self. You want growth tools to be your best self. You can kind of do it all.
To come full circle, that's exactly right. And who doesn't, irrespective of, these ways in which we diagnose or try to categorize people, who hasn't had several crises in meaning and purpose? And so there is a wide range of utility. I won't use that term because I can't even believe that's a term in the research now. I know about it, but it's like, come on, you can't think of anything better.
Please don't put that on the Monarch
but
website. I will be affiliate.
I appreciate you sharing how that was a very, very initial premise. How to if I could show efficacy on the toughest cases, how do I also make this applicable to folks who may not have as extreme clinical issues but need good care, recognition, and problem solving? And there's a lot of utility with that.
That's right. Well, I'm so thankful you are, leading this charge, and you always got my support here. And so glad listeners got to learn more about you, your journey, the way you view the world. And I'm always learning from you every time. I really like digging into transference with you in these roles, and more talks to come. We'd love to have you back on the podcast as well. The conversation will continue, and my co-host Ian, who couldn't be here today, I know would love to meet you. So you'll have to come back sometime, Damon. But for now, I want to be respectful of time. I know you got stuff coming up. So anything else you want to leave the listeners with? Anything else you want to say or leave while you have the microphone?
I have to return to this because it's in my bones. My mother would say on what constitutes a good day: be kind, be formidable and relentless in pursuing your goals, and for God's sake, make someone's day. If you can do that, it's a pretty good day. Can't wait to talk again. I so appreciate your time. It was incredible conversation, and I'll have to meet Ian soon. So give him my best.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. What wonderful words. Thank you for sharing. And I will try to honor your mother by living my day that way. And no wonder you're such a good guy with a mom like that. Well, I'm not surprised at all.
Likewise. Warms my heart. We'll talk soon, okay? Thank you again.
Well, thanks for being on the pod, David.
Bye.
This has been the Do You Feel Heard podcast. If you're interested in resources that will help you move through conflict, you can go to doyoufeelheard.com, where we have tools for individuals and couples.